From the time he was a boy, Mark watched his father wake up before sunrise, lace up his work boots, and head to the factory. His mother, balancing 2 jobs, always told him, "Hard work pays off," and Mark believed it. He studied hard, took extra shifts, and did everything society said would lead to success. Yet, no matter how much effort he put in, life seemed to have other plans. His first job out of high school was promising, steady hours, decent pay. But when the company downsized, he was the first to go. "It's just bad timing," he told himself. He found another job, then another, but each one disappeared as quickly as it came. Rent kept rising, bills stacked up, and savings? There were none. He wasn't reckless with money. He simply never had enough to save. Marriage was supposed to be his fresh start. He and Lisa dreamed of buying a house, starting a family. But dreams don't pay the mortgage. With mounting stress, late notices piling up, and a fridge that was often empty, arguments replaced laughter. One day, Lisa packed her bags and left. Mark had lost his wife, but the bills stayed right where they were. With nowhere to turn, he worked whatever jobs he could find. Construction, delivery, even cleaning offices at night. But the harder he worked, the further behind he seemed to fall. Then, the final blow, his landlord raised the rent again. Mark pleaded for more time, but the answer was simple: pay up or get out. And just like that, he found himself on the streets, a lifetime of effort reduced to a single backpack and nowhere to go. The first night on the streets didn't feel real. Mark sat on a cold bench, gripping his backpack like it was the last thing keeping him grounded. Just a week ago, he had a home. Now he was invisible. He told himself it was temporary, just until he found another job. But days turned into weeks, and every door he knocked on was another rejection. No address, no steady work history, no chance. Employers didn't want a man who had lost control of his life. Hunger became his alarm clock, waking him up before the city stirred. He stretched every dollar, choosing between food and a place to shower. One afternoon, he visited a clinic for a persistent cough, only to leave with a hospital bill he had no way to pay. Debt was chasing him, even when he had nothing left to take. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity. Then came the coldest night of the season. Mark shivered under a thin blanket outside a closed diner, listening to the wind howl through empty streets. A police officer nudged his shoulder, telling him to move along. Move along to where? He wanted to ask. That was the moment it hit him. There was no safety net, no one coming to help. He had fallen further than he ever thought possible. And yet, he wasn't truly broke. Buried deep in his backpack was a secret, an untouched fortune. Maybe it was an old investment he had forgotten about, a hidden stash of money, or a property no one knew he owned. But instead of using it, he held on to it. Why? Maybe pride, maybe fear, or maybe, after losing everything, he needed to understand what life at rock bottom really meant before deciding what came next. Mornings started the same way, packing up before someone told him to leave. Homelessness came with rules he had to learn fast. Don't sleep in the same spot too often. Don't trust everyone. And most importantly, don't let people see you as a threat, or they'll call the cops. Shelters filled up quickly, and when there wasn't a bed, the sidewalk became home. Some nights, the concrete was safer than the overcrowded shelters, where fights could break out over something as small as a blanket. Food wasn't guaranteed. Mark learned which churches served meals and which diners tossed leftovers in the alley instead of locking them away. The worst part wasn't hunger, it was the stares. People looked right through him like he didn't exist. Others avoided eye contact, clutching their bags tighter as they passed. He wasn't a person anymore. He was one of them, and that label felt heavier than the weight of his empty stomach. Some days he tried to find work. Come back when you have an address, they said. Other days he just tried to stay clean. Gas station bathrooms became his refuge, where he could wash his face and pretend, just for a moment, that he was still part of the world. But even small acts of dignity were met with suspicion. One cashier threatened to call the police just for using the sink too long. Mark wasn't sure what hurt more, the rejection or the realization that people assumed he had done something to deserve this. Through it all, the secret in his backpack remained untouched. The money could have ended this nightmare, but something held him back. Maybe it was the fear that he'd waste it. Maybe it was the belief that if he couldn't survive this, he didn't deserve a second chance. So he held on, waiting for a moment that felt right. A moment that, deep down, he wasn't sure would ever come. Every night, after finding a quiet place to sleep, Mark would check his backpack. Not for food, not for clothes, but for the one thing no one knew he had. Inside, hidden beneath a worn-out sweatshirt, was a bank statement from years ago. The numbers were real. Thousands of dollars sat untouched in an account he never closed. Enough to get a small apartment, restart his life. But he never withdrew a cent. It wasn't just about the money. Something inside him wouldn't let him use it. Not yet. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, after losing everything, he needed to prove to himself that he could survive at rock bottom before deciding what came next. He told himself that if he could make it through this, he'd know how to make smarter choices. But each day, as he dug through trash for food or fought exhaustion from sleeping on concrete, that decision felt harder to justify. There were moments of weakness, nights when hunger twisted his stomach into knots, and he nearly walked into a bank to withdraw the money. But then he'd see others, men who had given up, who had accepted that this was their life now. He refused to be like them. If he used the money out of desperation, he feared it would disappear just as fast as everything else had. He didn't want a temporary escape. He wanted a real plan. So he waited. He struggled. He learned. He paid attention to the world in a way he never had before. How people judged him, how opportunity slipped away the moment someone saw him as less than. It was painful, humiliating, but it was also eye-opening. And deep down, he knew, when he finally used that money, he wouldn't just go back to the life he had before. He'd build something better. Nights felt longer in the cold. Mark would curl up against a brick wall, his body aching from exhaustion, his mind drowning in doubt. What if this is it? The thought scared him more than hunger. He had seen men just like him. Once hopeful, once trying, now barely more than shadows, staring blankly at nothing. Some had stopped talking. Others had stopped caring. And Mark wondered if he was next. One morning, he sat outside a gas station, watching people rush inside for coffee, their lives moving forward while his stood still. A man walked past, wrinkling his nose. "Get a job," he muttered under his breath. Mark clenched his fists, biting back the urge to scream, as if he hadn't tried, as if all it took was effort. He wanted to explain, to make people understand, but he knew they wouldn't listen. Then came the night he almost gave up. A storm rolled in, drenching the city. Mark huddled under an awning, shaking from the cold, his stomach empty for the second day in a row. He thought about walking into the nearest police station and asking to be arrested. At least jail had food and a bed. Or maybe withdrawing his money, using it for one last meal, and disappearing into the night, leaving everything behind. Who would care? Who would notice? But just as he was about to stand, something stopped him. A man, even older than him, walked past, wearing nothing but a thin jacket, his hands red from the cold. And yet he kept going. No complaints, no anger, just survival. Mark exhaled, tightening his grip on his backpack. Not yet. Not like this. If he was going to change his life, he had to do it on his terms. And that meant holding on just a little longer. It happened on a morning like any other. Mark sat on a park bench, staring at his worn-out shoes, lost in the usual loop of hopeless thoughts. Then he overheard a conversation. Two businessmen, sipping their overpriced coffees, were talking about a house being sold for pennies because the owner had disappeared. One of them laughed, saying, "If you know what you're doing, there's always money to be made." The words stuck with Mark. He did know something. Years ago, before everything fell apart, he had studied real estate investing. He had even made a few small deals, learning the ins and outs of undervalued properties. The knowledge was still there, it just felt buried under the weight of his current reality. But for the first time in months, his mind shifted. He wasn't just thinking about survival anymore. He was thinking about opportunity. He had money sitting untouched. What if, instead of using it to escape, he used it to rebuild? That same day, he made a decision. Mark walked into the public library, a place he hadn't set foot in for years, and sat down at a computer. His hands trembled as he typed, searching for distressed properties, foreclosure listings, anything he could afford. The numbers weren't in his favor, but he wasn't looking for easy. He was looking for possible. And as he scrolled through listings, an idea began to form. This was it. His way back. As he walked out of the library, something felt different. The weight on his shoulders wasn't gone, but it was lighter. For the first time in years, he had a plan. He wasn't just a homeless man with a hidden fortune anymore. He was a man with a purpose. And with that purpose came something even more valuable, hope. Mark sat alone in the library, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was it. After months of struggle, doubt, and survival, he was finally ready to use his hidden fortune. But he refused to waste it. No quick fixes, no desperate spending. He needed a strategy. He made a list: housing, stability, income. If he was going to rebuild his life, every dollar had to count. The first step was finding a place to live. Instead of renting, Mark searched for foreclosed homes, properties being sold for less than they were worth. It wasn't easy, but after days of research and phone calls, he found one. A small, run-down house in a struggling neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was his chance. He used a portion of his money to buy it outright, avoiding debt. For the first time in years, he had a roof over his head, and it was his. Next came income. He knew getting a traditional job would be difficult with his recent past. So he looked for ways to make money on his own terms. Flipping properties, handyman work, even reselling used items, he explored every option. Slowly, his bank account started growing instead of shrinking. With each small win, his confidence returned. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building. But Mark didn't just focus on money. He knew that if he wanted real success, he had to keep learning. He spent nights watching online courses, studying business, real estate, and finance. The world had counted him out, but he wasn't done yet. Every move was intentional. Every step forward was proof that his past didn't define his future. And this time, he wasn't just getting back on his feet, he was preparing for something bigger. The first few months were brutal. Mark had a plan, but execution was another battle. Renovating his new home took more time and money than expected. Some days, he worked until his hands were raw, only to realize he had made mistakes that would cost him more to fix. He felt the old doubt creeping back. What if this was another failure? But every time he thought about quitting, he reminded himself. This time, he wasn't starting from nothing. Even as he made progress, the world wasn't quick to believe in him. Old friends barely recognized him. Employers hesitated when they saw his gap in work history, and banks weren't eager to lend to someone who had been homeless. But Mark had learned something valuable from his time on the streets. People's opinions didn't determine his success. Instead of seeking validation, he focused on proving to himself that he could make it work. Setback after setback, he adjusted. When a property deal fell through, he found another. When a handyman job paid less than expected, he reinvested his earnings into tools to make more money later. The difference now was that he didn't panic when things went wrong. He adapted. For the first time in years, failure wasn't the end of the road. It was just part of the journey. Through every struggle, Mark realized something crucial. He wasn't the same man who had lost everything. The pain, the nights on the streets, the moments of hopelessness, they had forged him into someone stronger, wiser, and more determined. He had once feared rock bottom, but now he saw it for what it really was. The foundation on which he was rebuilding his life. Years ago, success meant something different to Mark. A big paycheck, a comfortable home, and never having to worry about money. But after everything he had endured, he realized true success wasn't just about wealth. It was about control over his own life. He had rebuilt himself from the ground up, not just financially but mentally. The fear of losing everything again was gone because now he knew how to survive anything. With every smart investment, every business decision, his fortune grew. But Mark never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed as if he didn't matter. He would never look at a homeless person the same way again. He knew that behind every worn-out jacket and tired face, there was a story, just like his. And now he had the power to help. Not by giving handouts, but by offering opportunity. So he did. He started small, hiring men and women from shelters for renovation projects, mentoring those who wanted to rebuild their lives. He taught them what he had learned. How to manage money, how to invest wisely, how to find a path forward even when the world had counted them out. Some listened, some didn't, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that someone finally saw them. One evening, Mark walked past the same gas station where a stranger had once told him to get a job. This time, he was the one in a suit, stepping out of a car he had bought with his own success. But he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He had already won, not just in wealth, but in purpose. And that was a victory no one could take from him. Mark had once believed that money was the ultimate goal. But now, standing on the other side of his struggle, he saw things differently. Wealth was just a tool. The real measure of success was what he did with it. He didn't just want to enjoy his fortune. He wanted to use it to make a difference. Because if he, a man who had once slept on sidewalks, could rebuild his life, others could too. They just needed a chance. He started showing up at shelters not as a man in need, but as someone with answers. He funded job training programs, helped struggling families find stable housing, and taught financial literacy to those who had never been given the opportunity to learn. But his biggest impact came from something even simpler, sharing his story. He spoke at events, in schools and online, breaking the stigma that homelessness was a sign of failure. One day, a young man approached him after a speech. He looked nervous, hesitant. "I'm where you were," he admitted. "I don't know how to start over." Mark saw himself in the kid's eyes, the same fear, the same hopelessness. He smiled and handed him a business card. "You start by believing you can," he said, "and I'll help you figure out the rest." That moment reminded him why he was doing this. It wasn't just about rebuilding his own life anymore. It was about lifting others up, too. Mark had gone from having nothing to having everything. Not just money, but purpose, clarity, and a second chance at life. And now, he was determined to make sure no one else had to go through what he did, alone. What do you think of Mark's journey? Have you or someone you know faced a situation where life seemed impossible to turn around? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this story, don't forget to like it, subscribe and turn on notifications to receive more inspiring stories every day.